Hey Ben, thanks for the video. That makes it a lot easier to see what's going on as well always. So, first off, using the term wonky, totally fine. It's a technical term. We we all gotta use some specialized terms every now and then. That's totally cool, man. So, what I want to go off here is that when you do a joint placement, you don't have to get it like perfect right off the bat. A lot of times I will just place out a joint or do a couple of joints just to have them in my scene, and then I will move them around and place them where I want them. And when you do create your joints, don't necessarily worry about the hierarchy of it. Worry about the amount of joints a lot of the time, because what you can do now, like this, which defines like the relationship between them, that's just normal hierarchy parenting. If these three are supposed to be the corner joints and this is supposed to be the middle, I can just like select this one, and then select this one and parent them underneath, and you see now I've got like a brand new hierarchy and something that this graphical interface, the UI, shows as well. So don't worry about matching it perfectly. Like, what's important to remember as well is when you're working with Maya objects, they're always centered out completely. They're always like a unit across usually when they start out. You can see that it's like if I go top view, it's unit. I can just do that. Sorry, so yeah, it's a unit wide, unit across, and so basically what I did when I was placing these is that you can just do here, and you can hold down shift, no, sorry, X, and you'll see that will toggle the grid snapping, and if you hold down V, you will toggle the point snapping. So use these all the time. It's really handy to just toggle them by holding down these buttons. So to place my center joint, I'll just hold down X to get my center, my grid snapping. Click here, and then I'll hold down V, and I'll do that, and I just select all these joints, and boom. And then now they're wonky because they've gone into like the different places here. But again, we don't really care about that. That's totally fine. What we can do is to basically if we start to like mess around with these now, you see it'll give us a bit of strange values, and that's basically because of the orientation of this joint, which you can see in here. And that's basically what's happening there is when you create a joint. Joints are really fancy when it comes to transforms because you can zero out the joint rotation. So you see that the rotation is aiming down, the orientation is aiming down, but we don't have any rotation values. We always need translation values unless you have a group above which is zeroing it out, which is kind of like what you're having issues with. So you can see the joint orient here. But to just deal with this, we know that these joints now are exactly at the corner of these. So what we can do is basically just unparent them, and we can set their translate y to 0, and they're exactly where we want them to be. We can parent them back into the joint, and if I right click and select hierarchy, you can just scale these a bit nicer. So what I would do now as well, you can just duplicate it. Yeah, let me fix the orientations real quick. So for this, I just want to zero this out, and these are, see, just like 180. Just want to do the same for these. Have these be the same. Yeah. So now they're all nicely in world space. This can be really useful to change this if you want to have the controller have the joint go in a specific direction. For instance, if you wanted this with the rotate Y, no, sorry, the Y-axis, the translate Y, to go out, then you could just rotate it like that. I'm holding down J, by the way, to move in increments, which is something that you can see in oh, sorry, my goddamn viewport is here. So you can do discrete move, step size, but I usually just hold down J. So yeah, let's get back to this. Our joint is now completely centered out, and we can do parent these back again. And if I now hold down V, I can just snap that up, and I hold V and just go into Y, and we're done. That should be it. Another way that you could do this, where you wouldn't really have to deal with the zeroing out the orientations and everything, is that you could just create one joint, which you can scale down, fix your radius. You could go top view, and if you duplicate that, and if you now hold down V, so you can hold down V, you can just go in the two axes that you want, and that will basically keep it at the same translate Y. I can duplicate it again, move it over here. I can duplicate both of these, take them down, and now I can parent them back in, and they're completely flat, exactly where I want them. I can duplicate it, take it down, move this up. So that's also another way that you can do it. Let me just go through that one more time just to show you completely. So to create the first one, I just hold down X, get it in the middle where I want it, and I just scale down the radius, and I go into my top view, and I Control D, duplicate it, go into my move tool, hold down V to do point snapping, this one, and if you do this in just one axis, it will look at the closest point to that, so that it's really useful for only translating it in that axis. So I can move it over, now I know it's completely on line with this. I can move it up, and it's completely in this corner now. I can duplicate it again, move it over. I select both of these, Control D, duplicate, hold down my V key, move it down, and now they're all exactly in those corners. So now I select these, select this last because that's the parent, so you select all your children, then your parent. So these are all my children, joint 1 is the parent, and I press P, and now with this selected I can hold down my V key to go into point snap again. I go down, duplicate it, I go point snap, and I go up, and that's us done for placing the joints. So don't really worry about making sure that it's completely perfect. The time when you had like these two placed and then you ended up doing these two joints as like a separate thing, you could have just gone boom, boom, and then selected this one and paired them back in. and you would have been done. You could have deleted the extra joints. So don't worry about doing it in like a super specific way. There's always a bunch of ways to do things. So don't worry about that too much. Yeah, and you could also actually just do something like this, where you, instead of having that multiple division cube, you could just make a single one. So like a brand new one which doesn't have any subdivisions. So now you could go in, you could create a joint, and you could duplicate that, move it over, duplicate, move it over, duplicate, snap it over there. You could do that, duplicate it down, and then you could duplicate another one, and we could just go top view and then hold down X to snap it to this grid line, and then snap it back here, and then we can do Control D to, and then V to snap it back up here. And now we can parent all of these joints in, and again, that's us done. The good thing about doing it like this is that we, for now, keep all of our joints just in oriented to the world. We don't have any like strange rotations where our joints are like this. So if you go into like your object mode to move things, it would be like, what? Why are you going that way? I want you to go like backwards. And that's something to look into. Look into joint orients. This is really, really, really. Did I mention that it was really important? Because it is. It will really define how you work with your rigs as well. It is something that is, yeah, really important. Look into it, dude. Check out some tutorials on it. It's going to be really, really important. Like I said, really important. So yeah, now that we have this going, these are good. When you start to move this back down, group it, move it back up, you're completely right that this zeroes it out. The distance between node looks for, it doesn't go in world space, it basically just takes the exact values that you're piping into it. So these local space values, exactly as you said. You're so close, dude. You're stumbling across the answer almost, because you're saying you know what's wrong, but you're too focused on doing something that I did, but you're doing it a bit wrong. So you don't want to group your joints like this to move them into place. What you want to do is group your controls, because your controls will drive the skeleton. You don't really care if this needs to have translation values for that setup to work. Normally, if you have a rig with like a skeleton for a character, that will have translation values on it. It needs to. When you have children like this needs to be here. We can't zero these out. You need that relationship. The only thing that you can zero is these rotates. And again, if you do like, if I rotate this, saying that I want this joint to be in this direction, you see I've got all these nasty values. It's good to like just keep your hierarchy, your joints clean of that. You can have it in there, but it's just gonna be a bit easier to troubleshoot sometimes to see if you're getting values that are slightly off because of something. So what you can do is you can go in and do, you select your joint and you do modify, freeze transformations, and you can do, so if we just do this, you see it doesn't freeze the translate because it can't. It needs that. It froze to rotate, and we're still getting that orientation. Now if I do this to, for instance, a locator, and I rotate it, and I do modify, freeze transformations, exactly the same values as we had previously, and I do apply, you see it just goes back. We'll lose that rotation information, and that's one of the things that make joints really, really special. So if we go and check out the joint orient, you can now see that those values that I have previously, they're in here. So this is like a buffer, which basically it's kind of like the group that we put on top of our controls, but it's doing it internally, and it's just doing it to rotations. So that's something that's, I think I mentioned it a couple of times, but it's really important that you understand joint orients, because they will be really helpful for you in the future. So yeah, you have your control, then you group that, and then you place that into position. Now here's where the proper orientation comes into control as well. Because if what I normally do is, if we say that I have an arm and I move this up and and we do that, and perfect, that's an arm. So I can just do right click, freeze. Oh yeah, you can't see that. But if I do freeze transformations in that, I zero out those values, I zero out these. See, I have my joint orients in here, joint orients here. That's all good. So now let's say that I wanted this control to control this arm up here. Now what I can do is I can do this, I can do like okay, yeah, I think that looks good-ish. Okay, yeah. So now I say, okay, this one will control this. So I do constraint and do an orient constraint, and you're like, oh, what the heck? What's going on here now? And then if we have a look at this, and we check out these, what I've done now is I've done an orient constraint and not used the offset. Normally you don't want to use the offset, especially for just dealing with controls, because there shouldn't be any need for Maya to keep that data internally to always remember that offset. So what happens here is that the make NURB circle, the normal, which it's facing, is pointing out in Y, and Y on the joint is this way. So it might look like you're doing it the right way, but it's wrong internally for Maya. So the best way of doing this is basically, if I select this, the joint that I want my control to control, and now just for placing it, I select the joint, then the group for my control, then I can do a parent constraint with maintain offset turned off. That places it perfectly in line with this control now. So what I can do is I can just go in and rotate these controls, just do the CVs, not the actual rotation of it, right? You could also change the normal to be 1 down X, because you're going down X. Oops, sorry, turn off my transforms. And then I delete that parent constraint, so that this group is now, it's just like free floating in space. And now, if I then select my control, and then select this, and do an orient constraint, and again, I have maintain offset set to off, so it won't store any offset. It's perfect. 0, 0, 0. It's completely clean, and now it does this. I can go back to this, and we're all good. And that's basically the setup of a normal rig. Is you have just a bunch of controls in a hierarchy like this. So this would be my elbow control, which I would, for a basic FK setup, I would just do this. So I would have this, can do an orient there now, so I can do this. And the group of this control is parented underneath the control for this. So basically when I do this, they follow completely. That's taking advantage of the parenting hierarchy that you can get with Maya. And this is just really fast. You don't really need to separate these out unless you're doing something really fancy, which you won't be doing for a while anyway. So this is just a really quick and easy way of doing it. We can place like our shoulder, and then we can rotate our elbow. And this is completely clean and nice and awesome. One thing that can be good to know is that it's very common to, depending on what you do, you should be able to do just rotations for every single joint except the root joint in a, for instance, in a human skeleton, because there's nothing that's really translating properly. Everything is just moving, rotating. So that's something to keep in mind. And if you then say, but what about the hand? Well, that is just rotating along this fixed length anyway, but it's using the IK handle. I'm not sure if you've looked into that yet. That's what's that basically can take a start and an end point. And if I do that, and you can do this sort of stuff where you basically have two input points driving it. So yeah, let me just get rid of this, unparent this, and say, okay, masters parent parent. Component, I just rotate these. Oops. And I want to rotate around the object. That basically allows me to rotate around the pivot of the actual transform for each object, which is really handy. And now I will do that, parent constrain, and now you can move these. And again, it's really important that you keep these as is, because like you're saying, you're getting no values on them, but now you are when you're doing it like this. Okay, so to summarize, groups to move stuff into place, used for controls. Joints, you want their translation in world space. Like you group them in like a skeleton group, but that's just a container. That's just at the origin with zeroed out and 1 in scale all the time. You don't really move this. It just sits there just as to clean up your hierarchy. That's the only thing. So these move around and do all that stuff. So yeah, boop, boop. And I think that was it. I think we've covered, yeah. So I think we've covered everything else that needed to know. Yes, I'm just looking over the thread. Yeah, so just to, while I'm doing this, let's just cover, I'm not sure, there was a bit of confusion, I think, about soul grouping and parent constraint stuff. So if I do a cylinder and I group it, and I have a cylinder outside here as well, and let me just make this, I got my discrete scale on. So if I just do this just to differentiate them a bit. So now if I basically do my locator, I want that as a target parent constraint for both these objects. So I select that, I do constraint parent, that, constraint parent. Now notice that both of these have zeroed out translate and rotate. Now if I move the locator around and rotate, they still have the exact same values. But if I now move the group that contains the cylinder, notice that that stays in place, it doesn't move, and that's because the constraint is overriding it. So if I move my group over to here, if I look at this cylinder now and compare it to this, you can see that we've got completely different values in translate. If I go and rotate this, you can see that now we've got completely different values in translate and rotate. Because basically the constraint will maintain this object and maintain its translation and rotation to this object no matter what's happening above it. So again, like we were talking about with like the expressions and stuff, if you can have a group doing something like this above a constrained object, but that's not going to do anything if you want to like do the scaling and everything. But if you have something that's underneath that object, and let me just zero this out, and let me do a locator so that we can see better what's happening. Now, so we can move this around, and now we still have like our new locator here, and now I can do that in whatever, move it around, and still if I move that locator now, this will rotate, do all of that, and that still will just have these new values, because again that's like local space. Cool. I hope that clarified it a tiny bit. So I'm gonna leave it at that, and let us know if you have any other questions or if there's anything else that we can help you with. Cool. See you later, man.